In the late 1950s, Triumph, which had operated under the leadership of Alec Dick since Sir John Black's ouster in 1954, decided to develop a dedicated competition engine, something more advanced than its sturdy tractor-derived sports car engines, with an eye toward winning the team prize at Le Mans and making the engine a limited option for its future TR sports cars. Work began on this engine, known internally as 20X, with 20 representing 2 liters and X, as usual, representing experimental, around 1956. This was to be a twin overhead cam engine. Development was slow in fits and starts as time and resources were diverted to the development of new models such as the Herald. Testing of the new competition engine began in 1957. Eventually, the 20X engine came to be known as Sabrina, the Triumph men playfully emphasizing the resemblance between the engine's timing cover and the shape of a famous voluptuous model actress, Norma Ann Sykes, whose stage name was Sabrina. Famed Triumph employee and historian Graham Robson notes that the Sabrina name even overtook 20X in some official Triumph documents. It must be emphasized that this was a precarious time for Triumph. The smallest of the major British automobile manufacturers, Triumph under Alec Dick was on a mission to grow, buying various bodybuilding and component manufacturers with the ultimate goal of finding a formidable partner that would improve its standing and secure its future. As the end of the 1950s approached, there was still optimism. The Sabrina engine debuted at Le Mans in 1959 in 3 prototype cars on modified TR3 chassis with slightly modified fiberglass and steel TR3 bodies. These cars, which were relatively heavy, were known as TR3Ss. Unfortunately, the Sabrina engine's debut didn't go very well, although not really because of any flaws with the engine's design. Apparently, despite celebrated development engineer and works guru Ken Richardson's protests, the bosses at Triumph had insisted on running cooling fans on the Le Mans cars with disastrous results. 2 of the cars retired after fan blades wrecked the radiators. It was eventually determined that the engine mount softened during the race and allowed the engine to shift forward during hard braking. The 3rd car had its fan removed during the race and performed very well, running 7th overall and 1st in its class with 2 hours to go when an oil pump failure destroyed the engine. For 1960, Triumph decided to change the body styles wrapped around the Sabrina engine for its Le Mans cars. As was common, they worked from the basic structure of the previous year's cars, but they made modifications and built new fiberglass bodies based on one of Italian automotive stylist Giovanni Micolati's prototypes for the TR4, known as Zoom. Micolati had saved Triumph with his design for the Herald, and his relationship with Triumph was rapidly growing. The race cars with the Zoom bodies were officially known as TRSs. These were again heavy cars, even heavier than the TR3Ss, as well as being less aerodynamic than their predecessors, and they were actually mocked internally as flying rectangles and Coventry-registered barn doors. 3 of these cars were raced at Le Mans in 1960. The Sabrina engine proved durable, with all cars finishing the race, but a late change to less hard valve seats doomed the engine, with all the cars suffering power loss during the race from valve sinkage, and all cars failing to qualify for not reaching the minimum distance over the 24 hours, although, in their class, they were still only bested by 1 car. In the meantime, an economic downturn occurred, and Triumph's financial standing worsened. Forecasts for sales were halved, and Triumph was hemorrhaging money. While the company was deeper and deeper in the red, certain spendthrift habits persisted and, most important for our story, the competitions department was allowed to continue its Le Mans efforts. By the end of 1960, Triumph and commercial vehicle giant Leyland were in negotiations. In 1961, the TRSs ran again at Le Mans, and this time the performance was solid despite the challenges with weight and aerodynamics, and the 3 cars finished in 9th, 11th, and 15th places overall, and all qualified on distance, with Triumph winning the coveted manufacturer's team prize. By 1960, Triumph fully understood the limitations of its current Le Mans body-chassis combos and wanted to maximize the potential of the Sabrina engine, so in September 1960, months after the first 24 hours of Le Mans with the TRSs, Alec Dick and Director of Engineering Harry Webster commissioned the Italian race engineer Virgilio Conrero to develop a car for them. Triumph ordered 4 of these cars. This Triumph Conrero Le Mans car was in the works in 1961, although Triumph delayed things and ultimately altered its order to 1 car. Conrero built a tubular chassis, and the body was designed by Michelotti with extensive wind tunnel testing, and built by Vignale. The car was purportedly originally conceived for Alfa Romeo, who apparently canceled its Le Mans effort at some point around the time Triumph came calling. 1 prototype of the Conrero Triumph was created and survives today in a private collection. While the car was an exciting development, Triumph was in such severe financial trouble that its emergence came necessarily slowly and ultimately too late. Leyland finally came to Triumph's rescue, agreeing to purchase Standard Triumph International in late 1960 and taking control in April 1961, approximately 2 months before the TRSs won the team prize at Le Mans. After a very brief calm before the storm, during which Leyland realized that Triumph was not only not improving financially, but was actually on the way to an over £7 million loss for the year, there was a period of cost-cutting and bloodletting. The competitions department, deemed a luxury, was shuttered, and some key talent, namely Ken Richardson, scattered. In fact, the swift closing came before the one aforementioned Conrero Triumph prototype was finally delivered. And this is the end from which our story begins. Triumph's competitions department was soon enough resurrected, purportedly at the behest of engineering director Harry Webster and the sales staff, who always wanted to tout product based on race breeding or success on the track. At this point, a great deal of organizational knowledge was lost as documents related to earlier efforts had been destroyed, and memory of those efforts was largely with people who had left the building, so to speak. So there was a need to start nearly from scratch for 1962. An early move was naming Graham Robson competition secretary and asking him to begin planning, but the enterprise was ultimately placed under the control of experimental director John Lloyd. The first year's budget was a mere £12,000. Robson emphasizes that without Chief Mechanic Ray Henderson's experience and skills, reopening the competitions department would have been a much greater nightmare than it was. For the short term, versions of the new TR4 were run in rallying, but in 1963, a return to Le Mans was planned. While the new Le Mans effort was a collaborative one that involved Robson, Lloyd, Henderson, as well as various unsung or undersung heroes such as Chief Test Driver Fred Nicklin, Harry Webster is absolutely central to this story. Webster was director of engineering at Triumph from 1957 and continued in that role even after Leyland shook up Triumph's leadership. He was a major factor in the development of some of the most famous Triumph cars and was the one who forged the key relationship with Giovanni Michelotti. It was Webster who in 1960 asked Michelotti to work up a small sports car on a modified Herald chassis before Webster even had board approval for such a prototype. As one might expect, Webster was also deeply involved with the competition cars. Under Leyland, he was able to move the competition's workshop to be near engineering, and he even served as part of the Le Mans pit crew in the story to come. For Triumph's return to Le Mans after what would be a 2-year absence, the decision was taken to try to make the new Spitfire competitive in its class as a prototype car. The class handicap system was important to this thinking, as was the trend of manufacturers pushing the envelope in terms of the rules. First, we must remember that the Spitfire was a brand new car at this time. The bomb prototype was delivered to Triumph in October 1960, but there was no money to go forward with production. After the Leyland takeover in the spring of 1961, Leyland's Stanley Markland, at the time liaison between Leyland and Triumph, saw the prototype for the Spitfire in engineering and approved moving forward with it. Board approval for Spitfire production came in July 1961. The next month, Leyland fired, or, to use the best term in British English, sacked, most of the Triumph leadership, and Stanley Markland was installed as director, apparently despite some reluctance on his part. Development of the Spitfire continued apace until the car was unveiled at the Earl's Court Motor Show in October 1962. By the end of December 1962, fewer than 1,300 Spitfires had been pushed out of the factory. January 1963 was the first full month of production. Work on the Le Mans Spitfires began that fall in October. Hence, the Spitfire was in its infancy, in full production for less than a year, when the competition works team decided to modify it for Le Mans. Interestingly, in an interview decades after the fact, David Hobbs, one of the intrepid Spitfire drivers at Le Mans who went on to have a storied career in racing, provided a clue to the marketing aspect of Triumph's choosing the Spitfire for Le Mans. Hobbs may have been responding to a leading question, but he emphasized that the marketing team at Triumph was keen to stave off impressions that the Spitfire was a girl's car, although Hobbs said this was outside of his thinking when he signed up for Triumph's Le Mans effort. This interview is part of the Legends of Motorsport airing of the Triumph documentary for the 1964 effort, referred to later and indicated in the video description. The fall of 1963 brought a key development for the Le Mans project, the prototype for what would become the GT6. In 1963, Harry Webster sent a Spitfire to Michelati for him to create a fastback GT version of the car. Webster made this move with his customary celerity, that is, prior to official board approval. By the fall of 1963, the Spitfire GT prototype was complete and made its way from Italy to England. These are images of the prototype in Italy prior to being sent to Triumph. Aesthetically pleasing, but a poor performer because of the additional weight on the standard Spitfire drivetrain, the car would undergo a long, fitful development before becoming the GT6. But its design quickly became important to the Le Mans Spitfire effort. Graham Robson writes, "If ever there was an authenticated case of a silk purse being developed from a sow's ear, it was probably in the complete transformation of the Spitfire from a cheeky though mild little sports car into a formidable racing or rallying machine." For the new Le Mans project, the 1147cc Spitfire engine would be further developed as 70X, 70 for the number of cubic inches of the unit, and X, once again, for experimental. The aim was for 100 brake horsepower and 130 miles per hour flat out in a straight line, with all the work done in-house. This involved a new 8-port cylinder head that was tested in both aluminum and cast iron, although the aluminum was originally dismissed for use at Le Mans out of concerns about durability. There was also a new cam and reprofiled crankshaft with revised main bearings and other work. The result was an 11.75 to 1 compression ratio. Weber carbs and a free-flowing exhaust system were used. Development of the engine advanced to 98 brake horsepower in the initial version for 1964, and that engine was mated to a TR4 gearbox. Obviously, as one would expect for a race car, compromises were made for maximum power for Le Mans. The car was reportedly challenging from start and at slower speeds. Indeed, Mike Cook, who was at the time doing marketing at Triumph's U.S. headquarters, drove the 1965 version of a Le Mans Spitfire and described it in his 1981 book titled The Triumph Spitfire. He began by providing some key context about the circumstances that led him to be behind the wheel of one of these race cars, and then he related the driving experience. Following Sebring, this is 1965, 3 of the cars left Miami by plane for England to be readied for Le Mans, while the leader went to New York for display at the New York International Auto Show at New York's Coliseum. Your author, whose responsibilities for the company at that time included auto shows, undertook to drive the Spitfire racer from the service garage on the west side of Manhattan to the Coliseum. It was a distance of less than a mile, but it was through New York traffic. Starting the car was relatively easy. However, especially when cold, it would not idle. The 45 DCOE Webers fed too much fuel at low revs, and the engine would flood out unless the throttle was constantly blipped to 3,000 or more RPM. Once it was warmed up, I engaged first in the unfamiliar right-hand drive car and tried to get underway. No go. It stalled. 3 more attempts were made before I learned the correct slip-throttle slip movements necessary to get moving and screamed up the garage ramp and out onto 57th Street. The trip was made entirely in first and second gear, dodging and ducking amongst the taxis and trying not to have to stop for fear the rich mixture would flood the engine to a standstill. The exhaust note was ear-shattering inside and outside the car, and at 6,500 RPM it was enough to break windows. While Cook ends with what I assume to be a nice bit of hyperbole, his account provides a strong sense of the Le Mans car's streetability or lack thereof. In order to meet the homologation rules for Le Mans, Triumph had to make a small number, no fewer than 100, of its Go Fast goodies available to the public. They decided to sign a marketing agreement with Sid Hurl's SAH Accessories as the distributor of the factory performance parts. SAH already had a reputation for accessories and performance parts for Triumphs, and Triumph had relied on SAH's engineering and sales for its stopgap TR4 rally cars, but in this case, SAH was merely a seller of a limited number of factory-developed kits so that Triumph qualified for competition. Although no wind tunnel testing or science was behind it, the aerodynamic look of the Spitfire GT was chosen, and fiberglass roofs molded from the prototype car were used on the Le Mans Spitfires. Graham Robson says, Triumph took the Spitfire GT prototype to Le Mans to have organizers examine and approve the car. With Triumph aiming for lightness, the Le Mans bodies were made from aluminum panels produced during runs of production steel panels at forward radiator. It is noted that this would have involved a fair bit of waste, as the stamping process, without machine recalibration, which was apparently out of the question, would have worked inconsistently with aluminum and have made the items relatively precious. The cars originally had standard headlamps, but between Le Mans testing in April and the race in June, the headlamps were improved and faired in similar to Jaguar lamps. It should be noted, too, that the roof did not have the familiar hatch door from the GT6, but simply a fixed rear window with a post slot in the rear valance for the spare wheel. 4 cars arrived at Le Mans in June 1964, and 3 ran the race. I'll not here belabor things by trying to provide a play-by-play account of the car's performance. If you haven't already seen it, I strongly recommend Triumph's official documentary covering its efforts titled Spitfires at Le Mans. That film is available in a couple of places on YouTube, and I'll provide a link in the video description. The upshot of the performance was as follows. So in 1964, car ADU-1B, which ran as the 49 car, crashed approximately 2 hours into the race. ADU-3B, the 65 car, crashed approximately 12 hours into the race. ADU-2B, the 50 car, finished third in class, and that class was up to 1150 cc. It ran 271 laps, or 2,273 miles, at an average speed of 94.7 miles per hour. And the note there at the bottom, car ADU-4B was the spare car in 1964 and did not race. Overall, according to Graham Robson, it was clear that the 1.1 liter Spitfires were almost as fast as the 2 liter Sabrina engine TRSs had ever been, for they were lapping in less than 5 minutes and had a 134 mile per hour top speed, with the engines turning over at around 7,000 RPM. The inspiration for this episode is this Spark model of ADU-3B, the 65 car, in 1964. This car was driven by Jean-Louis Marnet and Jean-Francois Piot. It was the fastest of the Spitfires on the track up to its crash. Around 12 hours into the race, the car was bumped in the rear and the access panel for the spare wheel came off, allowing exhaust fumes into the car. Marnet was driving at the time and was unaware of the precarious circumstances. Eventually, he was overcome by CO, passed out, and crashed. Miraculously, he was only slightly injured and recovered enough to race again for Triumph in the fall. I think I first came across these Spark models of the Le Mans Spitfires while doing online shopping during the pandemic. They always seemed to be with overseas sellers, and the price was generally $300 or more, which is obviously an awful lot for a shelf trinket, but I thought they were cool. I didn't really look too carefully into the accuracy of the models, although I could tell they looked pretty good superficially. Anyway, a number of years later, I saw a few of these models for sale for a much more reasonable price, and I mentioned them to my family as something that I might want for Christmas, something I'd like to have, but under normal circumstances wouldn't pay for. And that's ultimately how I ended up with this model. I must note that the display case the model comes in is still factory sealed, and I don't want to break that seal right now. So I'm going to have to work with the model in this state, which will cause some limitations and possibly problems with glare, but I'll do my best. So let's start out by talking about the bad aspects of this model, things that are not accurate or that I don't necessarily love about the model. And first and foremost, I have to talk about these gold wheels. You can see the spare is gold as well. The gold wheels seem fanciful to me. Every photo, the video evidence from 1964, all of it indicates that the Spitfires had silver wheels. All the images of this 65 car seem to have silver wheels. I don't really know where that choice of gold wheels comes from. So that's odd, and I don't love that. The other real negative that I'll say about this model is that they don't really make any effort to indicate the hatch at the rear for the spare tire. So there are no handles or anything for that hatch. It's just not really represented on the model. And I personally would have liked to see a little bit of effort with that feature. So those are the real negatives. I will say that I'm not sure about the interior details with this model. They're a little difficult to see with it in this particular display case. But also, I haven't seen very many really good images of the cars from the period in terms of their interiors. I haven't really seen any clear interior shots. So that's a little difficult to tell overall. Based on what I can tell from the model and what I can tell from period images, though, I do think the model is pretty close in terms of the interior to the way that the original cars were. But I'm not completely sure about that aspect of things overall. There is one thing that I'll talk about a little bit later that is a nice detail in the model that is true to the original, having to do with that interior area, but we'll get to that in just a moment. Now, let's talk about the good things about this model. So first of all, if you look at the model head on here, if you compare this with period images, you will see that this is extremely accurate overall. It looks very much like the car did in the original. Now, all the Le Mans Spitfires had their noses painted in different colors or in different ways to help identify the cars, to help the pit crew identify the cars. The 65 car, of course, had this yellow nose, so that's accurate. The striping is accurate. The way that the numbers appear all over the car, pretty accurate when compared with period images. So that's all very nice. The rear of the car, again, outside of the spare hatch not being represented, the other details in here are really nice overall. You know, the 65 number looks much like it does in the images from the period. That sticker, that green diamond, you know, was on the car at Le Mans 64. I tried to do a little bit of quick research about stickers, Le Mans stickers, in the period, and came up empty. So if anybody knows what that represents, if that's some kind of inspection sticker or something else, you know, please let me know in the comments. So the general appearance is quite nice overall. In terms of details, I really like. If you look here on the door near the handle, there's a little clear light represented on the number here. Those are little lamps that were put on the numbers on the doors and the rear of the car, so that spotters could identify the car in the dark. And that's a nice detail. There is one here at the rear on the number near the ADU 3B. And of course, one on the other door as well. I really like that detail, as well as another important detail. The cars had colored lights on the top to help the pit crew identify what car was coming in the dark. This seems to be a red light that they've put on this model. I really could not verify from the various period photos, color photos, and the videos that I looked at. I couldn't really verify that the light on this car was red, so I'm not completely sure about that, but there definitely was a little identification light on the roofline, as is represented here. Love that those details are replicated on the model. Another interesting detail that is covered in the model are these quick jack points at the rear. Let's see if we can go this way. There. I think you can see it there. These little claw-looking things that stick out on either side of the exhaust at the rear. These I originally thought were too small because I looked at the restored version of ADU 1B in Graham Robson's book, Works, Triumphs in Detail, and the quick jack points on there are much bigger. They hang down much lower to the ground. And so I originally thought that this model had not done a great job of representing these quick jack points. But then I looked at actual photos and images from 1964, and the 64 cars definitely had these smaller quick jack points that did not protrude as much as the ones shown in the Robson book. So that seems to be accurate and very nice overall. Another detail that's really nice, this is related to the interior, but you can see that we have the 18-gallon fuel tank represented. with the filler up on the roofline, as it was with the cars. That is a nice detail that is well done on the model. So overall, I think there's a whole lot to like about this model. It is very nice. It has a lot of accurate details on it, and just a couple of several things that I don't like because they don't seem quite accurate, don't seem to be as well done as they might be. Just a quick note about Spark models, which can be great, but have been known to feature errors. I wish that I had a lot more time to go through period images of ADU 3B images from 1964 and more carefully compare them with the model so I could be more confident in my judgment about the accuracy of the model, but I only have so much time. But I wanted to illustrate problems that can exist with Spark models, and I'll use this image that you see on your screen now. This is an image of a Spark model of a GT6 Mark I. You can actually see on the base there it says Triumph Spitfire GT6 1996, it actually says. And all of that is odd. Most sellers represent this as a GT6 Mark I that was produced during the 1966 calendar year. So it's supposed to represent, I assume, a very early GT6. And if you know GT6 as well, you will immediately spot a couple of key errors. One is the grille on the bonnet is an early Spitfire grille. It is not the way the grille was on the GT6 Mark I. You will also note that there is a duct grille in the roofline. If you look there at the back of the car, that duct grille on the roofline is appropriate for a GT6 Mark II or GT6 Plus. It was not on the GT6 Mark I. So Spark models obviously can have some pretty glaring inaccuracies sometimes. As I said with my Le Mans Spitfire model, I'm pretty happy with the level of accuracy, but it's definitely not 100% perfect. For the 1965 campaign, Triumph lightened the race Spitfires by about 100 pounds, from 1,625 to 1,520 pounds, according to official Le Mans figures. Thinner gauge steel for the chassis frames and a prototype GT6 gearbox were apparently the source of most of the weight savings. Horsepower reached 109 through the use of the alloy head originally only used in the Rally Spitfires. Yet again, Triumph planned to take 4 cars to Le Mans, 3 entrants and a spare. But this time, at some point rather late in the game, the spare car was granted a starting slot, so Triumph scrambled to get the 4th car ready, recruiting drivers from the Rally team. Again, Triumph's documentary on this race is available on YouTube, and I'll provide links in the video description below. The happy results were, for 1965 Le Mans, ADU 1B, which was the 52 car, crashed at dawn while trying to clear the way for a faster car. ADU 2B, which was the 53 car, retired due to oil cooler leak that killed the engine. ADU 3B, the 54 car, finished second in class, 14th overall, with an average speed over 91 miles per hour. And ADU 4B, the 60 car, finished first in class, 13th overall, with an average speed of 95 miles per hour. It's important and somewhat amusing to note that the fastest car, the first-in-class car, was in fact the spare car piloted by the rally drivers. After the 1965 race, rapidly increasing speeds and rules changes effectively killed the Le Mans Spitfire project from further development. The works team began to develop the emerging GT6 as a prototype entrant. However, this project, known as the GT6R, was abandoned in the early weeks of 1966 as Triumph chairman Donald Stokes ended motorsport activities. Apparently only 2 photographs of the GT6R project survive, with at least one archive negative dated at the end of December 1965. As Graham Robson notes, it may have been, quote, mission impossible, unquote, anyway, as the GT6 engine would have put the car in the 2-liter class, where it would have been competing with a crowded field of fast cars, including Porsches and Dino Ferraris. So to peel back the curtain a little bit here at the small Triumph Sports Library and Archives channel, I have to tell you that we've had a fair bit of infighting. It generally goes like this. Mr. Producer will tell me not to do some video I've started working on, insisting that no one is going to watch it. And then after I post the video, he comes back and inevitably tells me, I told you so. At which point I insist to Mr. Producer that geniuses are often not appreciated in their own time. At which point Mr. Producer tells me I'm not a genius, which is inaccurate and insulting. But lately, we've kind of smoothed things over. I think we've come to an understanding. And in fact, Mr. Producer told me that he would create a very nice transition/introduction to this final segment of this video and insert it before I upload the video to YouTube. And I assume that he's done that, and I really appreciate the gesture. Of course, I would just prefer a straightforward apology, but I do appreciate the gesture. On a more serious note, there are several things that I want to address here at the end of the video, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on any of them, but I think they're worth mentioning for different reasons. First of all, I put a lot of work and research into this video. Still didn't turn out nearly as well as I had hoped, but I did the best that I could in the time that I have had, and I think it basically does what I wanted it to do. My biggest problem is that I really did a lot of research. I really did look at a lot of sources, and then I kept getting periodically pulled away from that work, because of other responsibilities and things. And that meant that by the time I got back to looking at my resources, no matter how good my notes were, some of it felt a little bit like I was starting over again. And then I'd say 3 or 4 times I decided that I wanted to add some tidbit into the video that I had seen somewhere, and it wasn't where I thought it was, and I couldn't figure out in what book I saw it. And of course I wanted to track down the source to make sure that it was accurate, or that at least I could point to where the information came from, and that took a lot of work. So a lot went into the video. Production went very slowly, much more slowly than I anticipated. But at this point, I've decided that it's good enough to post. I also wanted to mention that I had to kind of decide what I wanted to focus on the most in the video. And ultimately, I decided I wanted to tell sort of the big narrative about the Le Mans Spitfires and focus mainly on the car that is represented by the Spark model I had. Obviously, I could have taken other approaches. I could have focused on other things. So I could have focused more on the modifications to the cars. I could have focused more on the drivers. There are a variety of different approaches I could have taken. But I've presented things based on the approach that I settled on pretty early on in the project. So I also wanted to briefly address this idea that the marketing team at Triumph pushed for racing the Spitfire out of concern or fear that it was becoming known as a girls' car. set aside the fact that this is the 1960s and we're dealing with that moniker as a way of sort of dismissing it as if it's not a real sports car or something like that. Obviously, there are women who are Triumph enthusiasts. There are women who are excellent mechanics. There are women who love the sports car experience and all of that. So let's set that aside. I don't know whether that notion of it's being a girl's car among the marketing team at Triumph in the 1960s is true or half true or revisionist history. It's not a claim that I really encountered in any of the many sources that I looked at, so I really don't know overall. However, I do know that, and it persists to this day, that a lot of these cars that are smaller, less powerful, pretty, kind of little sibling cars do get saddled in the gearhead community with the notion that they are girls' cars or hairdressers' cars. We still see some of that today with more recent cars, especially cars such as the Mazda Miata or MX-5 and the Porsche Boxster as well. I don't really personally care about that, other than I do like the cults that develop around these cars. These cars just really tend to draw in people who appreciate them for what they are and maybe really like their underdog status. And in some cases, people who want to take these runts of the litter and turn them into unexpected alphas, which is what Triumph ultimately did with its Le Mans Spitfires. Regardless, I really appreciate the group of enthusiasts who are passionately drawn to these little cars that have kind of a bad rep in the larger car community that includes a lot of people who are really obsessed with giant engines and huge horsepower numbers and tiny 0 to 60 times and that sort of thing. The last thing I want to mention has to do with the fact that you will occasionally see sensational claims about how Triumph's marketing team lied as it was trying to sell the GT6. This is based around the fact that a lot of the marketing language when the GT6 first came out revolved around the fact that it took its breeding, or it inherited things from the Le Mans Spitfires, when in fact, as we know, the Le Mans Spitfires actually inherited their shape from what was the prototype GT6, the Spitfire GT, that Micolati designed in 1963, and then that original shape from 63 ended up being the shape of the GT6 when it began to be produced at the very end of 1966. So people will make these sensational, like, clickbait type claims. Oh, Triumph lied in its promotion of the GT6. And it is true that they played fast and loose and fudged things some and all that. I'm not denying that, but I just think those claims are overwrought for a couple of reasons. One is the public debut of the GT6 shape was with the Le Mans Spitfires. And that would be the point of reference for the general public when it comes to the development of the GT6. The other thing is the GT6 did have components, namely the GT6 prototype gearbox, but also other things that were initially tested at Le Mans. So a lot of that language, while it might be a little slippery and while you might, sort of parse words and be like, aha, that's not true or not exactly true, but a lot of it sort of falls within the range of kind of garden variety marketing BS, and so I'm not too bothered with it overall. Anyway, that's it. I'm not going to talk about that anymore. Thanks for watching. I'll be back with something else at some point, I promise.